At its core, LLMs and AI in general has completely redefined the idea of velocity. The prototype stage is just so much quicker and more fleshed out than we would have experienced before, where you usually have spent a lot of time writing documentation or make sure that you know what you want to build right from the get-go, because there's so much cost associated with bringing engineers on board to build something that it may not work out. So there was a lot of work before it even gets to a prototype stage, that something needs to get validated a lot, simply because of the cost associated with that. And now LLMs just makes it so much faster to just get to that version 0, to that prototype, that it makes it so much easier to just get some test out and just start getting the vibe of something and putting something in front of the users much quicker than before.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Ocel, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, here for another episode of the Leadership Exchange. Today, I'm here with Alfredo Lopez. Alfredo is the VP of Engineering at Hearst, focused on platform infrastructure and front end. Alfredo, how are you doing today?
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. We have such a great topic to talk about today. We're going to be talking about AI readiness and AI culture change at organizations, and what engineering leaders need to know to make that effective and to avoid some of the common pitfalls we watch people fall into all the time. But before we dive into that, I just thought, it's always great when we talk to a leader who's been with a company for a long time. I think you've been with Hearst for over 11 years at this point. I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of a take on kind of how you got there and kind of, how you've gotten to the position of VP of engineering that you're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of context before Hearst. Most of my experience was in startups and ad agencies. And I feel like I got a lot of focus on deliverables, focus on actually just doing things. But then I started noticing that there's a lot of value in building something long-term, where you see it through and you start planning trade-offs and you see those through over years, and the challenges of doing that, and then best practices around building something stable, secure, and all of those things that just come with really long-term applications that you have to take care of many things. And I feel like I was lacking that. And so back in 2014, I had this opportunity to build something from the ground up at Hearst. They were just starting to have their own engineering team in New York City. And so I was part of sort of the first team that was on the ground in New York City. And so I couldn't pass that opportunity. And over the years, it has been really rewarding to see that as an engineer, sometimes the answer is code, and sometimes the answer is to not write that code and rather solve the problem with communication, with process that can be informed by technical solutions, but not just trigger and write the code immediately to solve a problem. And I feel like over the years, that has been one of my biggest technical skills, or just skills in general, about when to not even solve something with code.
I love that. I love that idea too, because, I've been in consulting for almost my entire career, and I didn't even know about this idea that consulting is a place that you go when you don't want something permanent, because the companies I worked for and the projects I worked on were extremely long running. I mean, one of the projects I was on, it lasted 15 years. I wasn't on it for the entire time, but it ended up going 15 years. And the company built the types of processes like you're talking about that span and followed you from project to project. And so I didn't realize this in my early career, but I'm appreciating it more now, that truly success can be defined by finding ways to carry forward wisdom even in a rapidly changing environment. And I love that lesson that you have, that finding a way to build something, even if everything is shifting around you, what can you bring forward to the next iteration? Awesome. Well, hey, bringing something forward to the next iteration, that sounds a lot like as well the way that AIs process their context. I mean, that's one of the things we're going to be talking about here, is just, how can we be more effective with sort of AI transformation and going on in our org? So I guess to start out, give us a sense of what this period has been like at Hearst. I mean, you've been here now for the entire period in which ChatGPT has sort of taken the industry by storm. What has AI done for your company, I guess, across the board, as far as what has it done to your culture, what has it done to your processes, and what are the issues that you guys have seen?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like at its core, LLMs and AI in general has completely redefined the idea of velocity, and the idea that you can iterate much faster, that you are not, the prototype stage is just so much quicker and more fleshed out than we would have experienced before, where you usually have spent a lot of time writing documentation or make sure that you know what you want to build right from the get-go, because there's so much cost associated with bringing engineers on board to build something that it may not work out. So there was a lot of work before it even gets to a prototype stage, that something needs to get validated a lot, simply because of the cost associated with that. And now LLMs just makes it so much faster to just get to that version zero, to that prototype, that it makes it so much easier to just get some test out and just start getting the vibe of something and putting something in front of the users much quicker than before.
I would say, though, and I think you would probably agree, that so far AI adoption, or the AI effectiveness, we'll call it for that, as far as how it's moved the bottom line, has been extremely uneven. I think some people swear by it, like by what they're doing, like what a difference it's made to their workflows and to their efficiency and their productivity. I think other companies have abandoned project after project and have basically sworn off the whole thing as being one giant hype cycle. What are some of the issues that you guys have encountered, and why do you suspect it is that people are getting such a different experience in their organizations as to whether or not AI is actually moving the needle on any of their metrics?
Yeah, I think it's a two different problems. The first one, especially in large organizations, there's a tendency to want to make sure that there's a standardization, and so like a very clear message that it can be given to the overall org. And choosing one to standardize at this point in time is very hard to do, because there's things that are just moving so fast that trying to standardize on it, it's a fool's errand. You do not want to be standardizing on tools or models at this point, and you want to make sure that your engineers are using the tools that makes them more productive to them, and that might be a VS Code plugin or a new complete editor like Cursor, and then using different models and different strategies to use those models. Those things are not something that we have found good to be standardizing at this point, but the other things are the approaches that you could use these tools. And those are the things that we have chosen to standardize, and we're seeing way better results as of that decision.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, it is weird though, right? Because I think standardization, part of it is because organizations need to learn. I think one of the things that we've encountered as an organization is that you can tell people, hey, go play with whichever agentic coding tool you want to play with, but the learnings and the experiences that people have are extremely uneven, based off their own intuitions, based on their natural proclivities before they started using LLMs. I think we talked about this a little bit, but people who more naturally think in terms of specs and sort of first principles, I think have had an easier time getting better results out of AI. But then different people who are really good at prototyping have maybe moved the farthest with it. So like, how does an organization then start to make sure that they're getting those learnings, if one of the issues is that we can't like focus on one set of tools, one set of documentation, one set of learnings, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So one of the biggest learnings that we've had, it's that it's not necessarily the prompt. What matters is the context that you've given the LLM, regardless of the model. And these are things that we have seen work with any different kind of model. There are different approaches and different terms, so that's what makes it a little bit confusing. Like there's the term context, there's the term memory bank, but it's all around just giving them a set of instructions that every single task that they do has this sort of previous context to operate on. And the other thing is that regardless of the task, I feel like people have thought I'm giving them the context for the task at hand, and we've seen the results exponentially get better if you give them more context than needed for the task at hand. So if your context grows, but the task gets smaller, you will see the quality of the output be exponentially better than if you would do just the necessary context for the task at hand.
And just for the benefit of people listening, because again, I think we are in such a space where people are at different points in their learning journey. And I think even when you think you've heard a term, you maybe have heard the wrong definition for the term. When we're going to be talking about context, like what does context mean for you, hilariously, in the context of this conversation?
So these are like project rules is another term. This is something that you can embed within your code base or code bases. And then specifically, if you can set up a mono repo, if you have multiple projects that they're working in tandem, like you have your backend service, your front end, and different services, if you establish sort of like a mono repo approach, where you can give this sort of where you're talking about markdown files that exist in your code base that it specifies all of these different parts of the act of writing code, right? So what is your test framework? What kind of decisions you're doing in your structure? How are things? Which one is the backend service? Which one is the front end service? Stuff like that. The more that you can write, and this is something that you don't necessarily have to do at once. It can go and evolve as you tackle tech debt, or you move features, or you move different frameworks. It's something that needs to evolve with every single feature that you're building, and that's why it's embedded into the code base. And this is something that you can use across the board with different models and different tools. Right now, again, there's no standardization, so you may want to have different files names and different structure, but they all can read at the same day. At the end of the day, the same output
Yeah.
of the code base.
We'll be back to the episode in a second, but first I'd like to acknowledge the team behind the channel, This.Labs. We're seeing 3x to 5x productivity improvements with our teams and clients using tools like Cursor, Claude Code, and GitHub Copilot. We help teams adopt these technologies and get max value out of them through strategic partnerships, trainings, and other software engineering services. Check us out at ai.this.co. Thanks, now back to the video.
Yeah, I think it's also helpful to just understand that like context is the context. Context is the sort of background information that the models and the AI has while it's processing your prompt. And so,
Correct.
you know, for engineers, one of the best ways that comes up a lot is if you have front-end engineers who are working on your user interfaces and your websites and your apps, and you have back-end engineers who are building out all of your services. Like you were saying, if you have the two code bases or the multiple code bases in one repository, as you are building out the front end, it is informing what you're doing based on what it knows the services are already built like. So it already have the contracts, and it already knows how they're meant to be used, and it can correct issues that it discovers. Like that's an obvious one, but it can go further than that, right? I mean, like what I've seen too is if you put documentation of requirements, if it has access to obviously software specs and software docs, but it could go as far as if you have meeting notes in its context, it can go, hey, you built it this way, but in this meeting, you said not to build it that way. Or you might start building something out and it knows you talked about it in a recent meeting and it pulls that in. I think we'll get to where context can be problematic if you have too much of it. But I think at a high level, not enough people really are thinking about ways they can give AI better, more complete context. And therefore, I think they often are limited on what they're going to be able to get out of it based on just what's in the training set of the LLM, which is usually not your company's corporate processes.
Correct. Yeah. And something that changes over time as well.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Your code is not in the training set. And so I think your results are quite limited if you don't give it access to the things it needs to understand who you are, what your company is, what your product is, and things of that nature. Well, let's talk about some of the things that can, I guess, happen, right? So we talked a little bit about people developing this, working through this thing. People are trying to get the tremendous value. I mean, I know I've said this. People have been guilty of saying things like, it can drive a 5x, a 10x, multiples of productivity gain to your team. That's very attractive to companies, and I think a lot of companies are willing to put money out there to do that. But, tell me a little bit about what can happen, I guess, if a company isn't careful about how they approach that.
Yeah. So this is something, again, that everyone's focusing on. Those like really big eye-opening, like this would take me weeks or months, and now I can do them in hours or days. And that's great. That's a really what I like to call an impressive side effect. But I feel like when you focus on that result and you build your strategy to integrate it into your workflows, it can backfire, because what immediately we've had engineers focus is, whenever I'm tackling something that is going to take me longer than a day or a week, that's only when I start using those tools, right? And you have a different level set of expectations of what this big like feature would have to do. And so you have folks that approach it with a prompt like, I want to write this feature. And you just expect that the result is the finished feature. And I feel like that's part of the problem of like the vagueness that you can have on your prompt, also with or without the context. But when you flip that on its head, and at the end of the day, a complex feature, it's a set of tasks put together in order where you end up with this big application or big project, and you start focusing on breaking that work up from the littlest tasks up to the finished project. That's where we've seen the developers get the most value out of mentally introducing as part of the daily workflow. So a big example is when engineers focus on just reaching for these tools as part of a longer task and not small task, it's very easy for engineers to forget about the cycle of development that is outside of code generation. So especially as part of a team, writing code may be at the beginning or maybe at the middle of documentation, diagrams, tests, and then tickets on a particular app like Jira or Linear. And all of those things have to be in sync to what the code is actually doing on your application. And engineers, if you're just thinking about the code generation part of, I'm just writing one line of code, I don't need the LLM to do that for me. I can actually do it faster than the LLM that would take me to type this up to tell it to do. I feel like that's the fallacy that a lot of companies are falling into, and engineers, that then you forget that if you do it by yourself, now you are on the hook for all of that rest of the life cycle as part of the life cycle of code. But if the LLM is doing those one line of code change, it can update the documentation, it can update the diagram, it can update the Jira ticket, it can notify people, it can do all sorts of stuff as part of our workflow that you have taught it to do. And now you are not, one line of code could potentially end up being like a 1 day of non-code tasks that maybe because it's not on you as part of your job description, you don't necessarily see that effect. But that's, to me, the moment that you start showing that to the engineers, they start seeing the value of introducing it as part of the daily workflow, no matter the size of the task. And that's what causing the momentum to start increasing small tasks on top of each other, where you start seeing the results of, I'm getting this big task done in a really short amount of time. But you didn't start from the complexity. You started from really the small things adding up to the complexity.
That's right. What is that about? Like, you eat an elephant, I guess, one bite at a time or whatever. Yeah, you can't do the whole thing. I mean, I wonder if you agree with this, though, because one of the things that I've realized is that our industry, now not every company, and maybe not your companies, but a lot of companies have been leaning increasingly on more senior engineering resources, and to some extent decreased a little bit their focus on processes, because when you have more talented engineering resources, they can operate within an ad hoc process a lot more easily. Like, they have their own methodologies for how they keep track of what they're doing and how they're putting it together, but the formal documentations sometimes are lacking. And the teams that I've seen and the engineers I've seen who do the most ad hoc work, meaning that they don't realize what they're doing, they don't realize they're doing designs and things of this nature, but they're doing it in their heads because they're talented enough, they're the ones having the most trouble with AI. And I think this sort of follows from what you're saying, that the people who are the most deliberate with their processes, who are leaving that what is now a context trail for the AI, are the ones that are actually seeing quite good results, because it just turns out that you need to be able to communicate yourself. And the amount of engineers I've talked to who are like, I just love using AI. I don't know if it's writing any code for me, but I wrote so much about what I was thinking on paper. I caught so many mistakes. And I was like, yeah, I've been trying to get you to do that for years. And I think that what's funny is with many technologies, it really highlights both your best practices as an organization, but also your worst practices. And I think like you were saying, that's a bit underappreciated in this AI adoption world. We think it's an entirely independent thing that you learn, but I think it really grafts on and highlights your best and worst qualities as a culture, especially an engineering culture.
Yeah, absolutely. We've noticed that we over the years we have associated a type of different skills associated to being a senior engineer or someone that is in engineering management, and at the end of the day it's the ability to chunk the amount of work that you have to do, because most likely you are doing many things multitasking and you're doing a lot of things at once, and that's just the exact level of skills that it will give you a better outcome using LLMs, the ability to be able to see this big project as part of small chunks on top of each other, and even in parallel, the ability to parallelize work. And so now that what we're seeing is that we are expecting this type of skill sets even further what we call a senior engineer. So we're just kind of like increasing the expectation of the skill sets of what we would call a junior engineer before. And so that's really what's happening. We're kind of like bringing that skill expectation down in order to be able to work with these LLMs.
So these things that we've been talking about around context and, about not tackling the most complicated things with AI or not exclusively using it for that and making it part of your daily workflow. I think one of the things that's maybe that highlights this issue is the concept of vibe coding, or just vibe anything, right? But this idea that you're going to just go in, tell an LLM, hey, I want to do incredibly complicated thing, and expecting it will one shot that out. Most often it can't. And I think once that it doesn't, people are uncertain what to do with that fact. Some people will just retry the same thing 4 or 5 different times and see if anything's different. Other people just give up and curse the technology entirely. So I was wondering if you could walk through this idea, kind of how everything wraps together with this encounter, that like where people are trying things and the AI is just completely out of their control and they just either get frustrated or they can't get consistent results out of it. Like, have you guys encountered this, and what are some of the things that you guys are doing to overcome this?
Right. So it goes back to the amount of tasks that you're doing at a given time and tied with the context. So we've seen the biggest value when you keep the context very high and you keep the tasks really small. That's where the LLM can do. And as part of what we're seeing now with agentic workflows, it's really just a loop of doing that over and over. So at the end of the day, they're building this massive project and feature for you, but internally, it's really just like a group of tasks being done very quickly, one after the other. And that's where we're really seeing, even if the LLM is doing this internally and you're not visually seeing this stopping points, that's really the difference between vibe coding and just having one big prompt that you expect a fully finished feature or project on the other end, versus internally doing this very small set of features one after the other.
Yeah, it's just, I guess what I'm thinking and what I'm envisioning is this idea that an engineering culture to successfully adopt AI has to make it part of the core pillars of that culture, the idea of reducing hallucinations. I think people believe, and I think somewhat incorrectly, that hallucinations are going to have to be a necessary part of engaging with AI. And I think it is going to be a necessary part that they exist, but we need not accept them as an ordinary part of our utilization of AI-related tools. So I guess what I'm saying here is that, I heard this interesting saying that 80% reliability in an AI product is basically will never be used, right? Like people expect 99 or several nines of reliability on an AI product, of any product, in order to think that it's working at all. So even something that works 90% of the time can be seen as a great failure by the market. And so I think people need to be thinking and building processes, tooling, and just a hunger for reducing hallucinations. And you can do that through the stuff you're talking about, through different prompt engineering methods, context engineering methods, by smaller tasking, by learning how to do chunking up work into different agentic workflows. I just think, don't you agree that that's just going to have to be part of the DNA, part of the cultural shift that people are going to need to successfully adopt this? Like, it's just not
Right.
to accept hallucinations as a given.
Correct. And I feel like every single time, there's a reason why the LLM is hallucinating, right? There's no dark magic behind it. So one of the insights that we've developed is whenever the LLM gets something wrong, or it's just hallucinating, or it's not giving you the expected output that you expected, don't correct it. Rather, go back to your context and figure out where you don't have the necessary granularity or nuance that the LLM needs to have in order to distinguish between this different tasks that you're giving it that is not getting the right really granularity to why it got something wrong. And that's something that it's takes time to develop, but we're humans, we tend to just tell it, no, you did it wrong, but that's not really helping you in the long term. It's really stopping the task, going back to the memory bank and updating it and restart the task again, and you will see much better results.
Right. And especially when you're using AI tools outside of your engineering org, I mean, realistically anywhere, even in the engineering org. But, if you're going to be packaging up an agentic tool for use in your different, your marketing teams, your sales teams, and things of that nature, I think, you're going to want your engineers that are putting that together, or the vendors who are giving you the thing, to be able to explain to you what kind of processes they have to reduce hallucinations. One of the things you can do is exactly what you said, right? Is go back and make sure the context is clean. But I've talked to other people, and one of the things you can do is that it turns out that AIs are remarkably good at validating the outputs of other AIs, and you have this kind of like chained. You would need chained failures in order to create then a hallucination at the tail end. There's no perfect way to get zero, but you can get things to near zero simpler than you would imagine by having AIs vet other AIs, right? Obviously, if you have non-AI ways to vet outcomes, do that as well. But if you don't, if it would require a human, sometimes an AI can remarkably reduce hallucinations. And I think like that's another tool, is that people need to be building hallucination reduction into their project plans for building or using these tools. It's just like, how am I going to get my hallucination rate down? It can't just be try it 4 or 5 times until it gives you what you want, because that is going to produce so many more errors to an inattentive person or an inexperienced person who can't discern what is a sophisticated hallucination from a real result.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I feel like experienced engineers are able to distinguish. Sometimes you have a bug, but sometimes the code is doing exactly what you told it to do. It rather is the bug in the spec, that it wasn't like the moment that you read it in plain English, it's like, well, it's doing that. It's just like the way that I structure my prompt or my context, it's not specific enough or clear enough. And this is why we divide pretty much the act of doing this work in 2 big stages. One is planning and the other one's acting. And you are able to split different models for this different tasks. So there are models that are better at thinking, and there are models that are better at actually making the code changes based on a given set of instructions. And planning is really the stage where you are opening up that to other external consumers. So what we do, we establish a planning using different roles. So we have a tech lead role within the code base and a developer role. And our tech lead role for the LLM is creating this planning for tackling this project or feature, and outputs that into a Jira ticket that then we can share with other team members and confirm that the messaging or the spec, it's clear and granular enough to the outcome that we want to achieve. And then anyone can update that Jira ticket outside of the code base. And when we're good to proceed, that's when we switch to acting mode, and we can switch models, we can experiment with different models and act on those level set of the instructions and the order that they need to proceed.
It's funny too that like one of the things that I've seen, I'm curious how you guys handle this, which is that when we've had people start to experiment with using agentic outputs to help with all sorts of things, it can help with code reviews, it can help with document reviews, it can, glean insights from meeting notes, whatever it is. I've found that people do a lot to think about what goes into the model to get good data out, but so far not enough about knowing how to make the agent give you grokkable information. Like the amount of times I've had an engineer pass me a document and it's clearly AI generated. Great. I care more about the insights than how they created it, because otherwise I wouldn't have had it at all. But the document it's so hard to figure out what is important, because it's not necessarily just flowery language that the AI has. It's just so much information. And sometimes it overlaps and it's duplicative, or it's not well organized and things of this nature. I'm curious, have you guys done any investigation or any work on like improving the how to get better results in a way that humans can grok easily? Like, I find like what used to be called human readable was making a computer take code and put language into it to make it so that humans could kind of understand a little bit better. But now I find I need the reverse. I need like a down compiler for LLMs, which is like take the flowery language of an LLM and give me the quick hits, because it's too dense. Like, how have you guys dealt with this problem so that you can easily tell what an LLM is telling you?
Yeah, so I feel like that's part of making sure that there's a human in the middle between the planning stages and the acting stages. Because what we found is that when you make code and the specs actually more human readable, it's actually helping the LLM as well, versus like verbosity that you might get from other models or from the LLM itself. It actually affects the quality of the LLM in its output, which is kind of like ironic. But that's something that I feel like we need the human in the middle to verify that you have the right amount of information in that document. And just overall, I think it's a bit of a poetic justice that LLMs are really punishing like really verbose documents and really like unnecessarily abstract code bases that if it can't figure it out, your code. Now imagine what a junior engineer would suffer. And so I feel like that has been one of and why some of the companies that I know that have a lot of custom code are really having a hard time integrating LLMs, because there's just so much more work that you need to do to teach them about these patterns that are not common or in their training set. And I feel like that dictates backwards of like how you write documents and how you write code to make the LLM really work out of the box as much as possible.
Yeah, it's I was thinking about this some more too, and it occurs to me that one of the things that I think I do believe now, honestly, I'm forming this thought as we're talking, is that I wondered why I didn't like LLMs writing documentation for me. Now, not documentation like this is what the code does. What I meant is like software docs, requirement docs, and things of that nature. And I feel like part of the reason that I haven't enjoyed it as much is because to me, that's not what an AI is greatest at. Now, by that I mean, I'll use the AI to help me brainstorm what are the parts of this that I'm not thinking of. What am I missing? Like I use it as, like you said, part of my daily driver on top on tasks big and small. But the thing that I'm thinking about here is that I sometimes have said, hey, I want to make a new feature that allows users to do returns, automated returns, and build me a doc for that, right? And it'll build out a whole software spec. And if you ever use an LLM to do something like this, it'll say, oh, I think that'll take 72 weeks to do, and it'll cost you $150,000. You're like, where are you getting any of these numbers from, right? And a lot of times a developer might start there, and then they go in and start to review the doc. And what tends to happen is the doc isn't close enough to where the developer would have taken it. So you get sort of a fatigue of trying to wrestle the document to the direction you want it to go. And I found that I think I want humans to do take the lead on doing more of the things earlier in that pipeline, because the context of a software requirements spec is so dense. It's so valuable. Like you were saying, if a human is going to provide any value in this loop, it's by being the one who's putting most of those words to paper as far as the critical decisions that are being made, because the AI will do profound things with that. I think if you start with an AI spec and then you have a human lightly edit it for clarity, and then you have an AI go on it, you get kind of a copy of a copy situation. I just think if you're going to do stuff early on in the chain, humans need to spend a special attention to it and realize that AI won't make your software specs 10x easier to make, because that's not the thing it's super fast at. It's super fast at taking dense context and doing a lot with it. But that spec writing stage is the construction of context. Like the AI might be very good at going and summarizing, hey, we've had 100 meetings with the client. Go summarize the biggest pain point so that I can make a spec that deals with that. That it's great at. But if you're just saying, build me a spec, I think, you have to have a different idea of what AI will give you in that situation because ultimately you're starting the new dense nugget of context that will drive the entire process from there. And so, have it assist you, but realize that as a human, that's where you're making your money these days. What do you think about
Yeah,
that idea?
absolutely. Right. And I feel like that's I feel like we focus so much on code generation and the context to have code generation, but itself, the act of writing spec, it's something that can have its own context with rules that you want to train the model when it's in planning stages. What are the things that you wanted to focus on? And what are the right trade-offs that you wanted to have when it's planning this sort of like project, right? And I feel like that's part of again, one of the skills that we have usually associated with engineers that are moving up the ladder to senior or engineering management is having really clear, both in writing and verbal communication skills. And now those are really the skills that you really need at every level of engineering now to really make the best use of the LLMs. But yeah, likewise, the more that you are able to train and very specific at the planning stage, you can also give it a context into how you want these documents to get created. And that has also helped us a lot.
Awesome. Well, hey, we're getting pretty close to the end of our conversation, but I wanted to give people something very practical to work on, especially the types of things that you've been talking about, because I think you've really been letting us know, that AI transformation, embracing AI across your organization is a cultural shift for people. And we've talked about how it can highlight some of the best and worst qualities of your organization. So for people that are starting this journey or preparing to start this journey, what are some of the things they can be doing ahead of that in order to get the most out of it that would help with some of the things that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, I would say the first and foremost is define what's a consistent structure for how you want the LLM to know about your ecosystem. If it's a set of applications, a microservice, think about a monorepo approach. Even if it's not an actual code base that have all the services, you can create a pseudo repo where you train your team members to clone all the repos within the same consistent structure, so the LLM knows that all the services are within the same level of the folder structure. That's the easiest one. And the other one is help the AI help itself. If you go to a repo and you don't have documentation or test, or you are not using types in a JavaScript code base, all of these things are things that you can start using the LLMs today to help you do that, which is only going to make the next task that you use it with much better. All of these tasks have been usually things that have a low ROI or like an immediate thing that engineers usually put to the side, like, oh, I'll do the test later, or I'll write the documentation later. And we're really seeing, like, the moment that you're prioritizing that with the LLM, you're going to get a much higher quality on your next task once you have a code base that is well tested, well documented. And especially with TypeScript, the LLM internally can validate itself before providing you with a change set to apply.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, anything you can do, standards or guidelines. That could be coding. That could be run sheets for your organization. If you got a sales scripts, anything that you're doing at your organization, if you can write it down in clarity, because AIs are pretty good at gleaning things from how you're acting, but it'll be so much more effective if you explicitly have written down what it's meant to do. So I love that idea of just getting it on paper as a good way to be prepared for AI.
Also, give the LLM like that 1 year, 5 year view of the code base. Like, eventually we would love to do this, but we can't do it because we need to be backwards compatible. That's really valuable for the LLM to know, okay, I can move things around a little bit. Like, just give it that overview of where you want to be in the future. And it's going to help it do the task that it needs to do today way better than if it would otherwise not know that.
Awesome. Well, hey, as we wrap up here, can you let people know where they can find you online if they want to connect or find out more what you think on this topic?
Absolutely. So I'm still on Twitter. We'll still keep calling it Twitter. So you can find me there. That's where I'm the most active. But otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thanks to Alfredo for being our guest. Thanks to each of you for listening. Hope to see you all next time. As we like to say, the conversation doesn't stop here. You can find all of Alfredo's links. We'll put it in the show notes so that you can contact him or connect with him if you'd like. and let us know what you think. But as we close out, we'd just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This is trusted by names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right, everybody. See y'all next time.